Welcome to another episode of the Common Theory. I am very excited today to introduce some friends of mine, and we are going to be doing a kind of special thing with everybody this time. We have a kind of a cPDH versus cEDH, and we're going to do a nice little comparison. And just, I'm just so excited, guys. I don't even have a lot of words to even say. So, of course, everybody knows my man Dallas. And I'd also like to introduce Charles, and I'd also like to introduce Dylan to you guys. Um, if you guys would like to introduce yourselves, and
Yeah, so I'm Charles. Some people might know me as the Mono White Guy. I've been on a couple of cEDH YouTube channels like Playing with Power. I have writing credit from the Tolarian Community College for one episode that he did. And you might have seen some of the decks that I've built, played before on Commander Versus as well. So I'm a little bit here and there. Probably never seen my face before, or you probably don't see much of my face.
I'm Dylan, aka Scorish. Um, yeah, I don't really do much of anything. I'm just a guy who plays cEDH. I play a lot of it, and I've been dabbling in some cPDH, and happy to kind of dive into it a little more.
don't be too modest. Don't be too modest. Scorch down here, he's a very prominent member of the CDH community down here in Miami, Florida. So he does very well in events. He tops quite frequently and has won several. So don't let him fool you
He
with
said it, not me.
that nice demeanor he has down there. He's as cutthroat as they get. So, but yeah, I mean, let's kind of get to it. Dallas, do you have anything to start with, or
Sure. So we've got some cEDH folks with us here on our cPDH podcast. And one of the main reasons for that is we're going to be talking about some of the differences between the formats and such. But let's go ahead and start with just impressions that you guys might have of the Pauper Commander format in general.
I've played a little bit now. Originally, I built a very quick Dargo Kedis deck that was basically built on combat damage and going as aggro as possible. And recently, I think in one of the first tournaments, what's the name of the tournament series, if you can remind me, Chris?
the Sanctuary?
The Sanctuary. So on the first Sanctuary tournament, I played a little bit of Third Path Iconoclast, which was fun, and I enjoyed kind of brewing in the Izzet space, trying to take some 60 card heuristics and put it into Pauper. But I realized playing that tournament against other cPDH players, the power of combo, because of the lack of truly efficient counter magic, combo is pretty rampant and it happens over the course of turns and it's hard to stop, especially playing against like stuff like Gretchen, Titch Willow, and all that. It's a limited perspective I have on it, but it's interesting. It's very different than what I expected.
My thoughts on this, I've not played any cPDH at all. I did enjoy a really great casual game that I got to play with Chris, where he was playing Adele Adrian and against some casual decks that uh, our mutual friends had built up and such. And I thought that was pretty cool. I don't have so I'm assuming that for those of you who are watching this, you're probably getting into cPDH, or you're like, oh, CDH players and their thoughts on cPDH. I probably have played CDH, so what do these CDH players have to say about cPDH? And honestly, I think like the first gut instincts most people will hear or think about when they hear Popper is things like power levels and such. And I think that you probably want to just take that notion out the window. And that's like my gut reaction about that. And the reason why is you want to look at instead a larger ecosystem in Magic the Gathering. We just recently had Commander Masters released, and one thing to note is the fact that in almost any Master set or like a Horizon set that gets printed, the rarity of a lot of cards gets deprecated. So, uh, uh, like and I'll just use an example like Lightning Bolt being printed at common, or like Locks on a Warhammer, which had like a really weird rarity printing history. It was first an uncommon and then a rare and now an
Yeah.
uncommon, right? And so I mean like, and that's like a large abstraction. Again, I'm not necessarily talking about Popper. I'm just talking about people's perception of, just because you're not playing rares or you're not playing like some super expensive deck that you're playing with kid gloves on. That's not necessarily the case. And Dylan brought up a really good point about like things like counter spells. Not, no, you won't find like a force of negation or a path of negation in this particular format, but you do have like, I think, like an appreciation of certain spells, like say like rune snag or something like that, which is like, one costs less of like a mana leak. And you appreciate some of the impacts of that in that type of format. It has its own particular type of metagame for sure, but it, in certain aspects, I think that like I don't actually. This might be a question for you, Puzzle and Chris, about like, how do cPDH players and just Popper players in general feel about like Horizon sets and Master sets? So they're like, "Yay, it's Christmas! I hope this card gets demoted into a common," or "Oh no, this card is now a common."
You want to take this one?
Sure. So during this last spoiler season for Commander Masters, I think in general the format is super excited for downshifts. At least on the competitive side, from what I've seen, we love seeing the power level just hike up because we're competitive. So we're like, I want to see my deck get better. Gutter Snipe downshifted to common. This is insane. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody just gets super excited.
That's perfect. That's actually like a great example of like, hey, we want a counter spell at common that's like easy to use and accessible for us and things like that. And I want to get into like that meta question about it, of like, why are good counter spells so hard to find? Why, and I think that is actually the part where you might want to think about Popper in any type of format, whether it be PDH or just like 60 card Popper and such, is why are certain cards printed at certain rarities. I think there was a Twitter thread that I commented on about Popper EDH a while back. And Chris, I know that you did a video recently about like stacks in cPDH. And one of the things that I brought up is the fact that, like, regardless of how powerful a card is, if it's like a rule altering card that's like, say like, all right, yeah, players skip their first main phase every turn, right? And so it would be untap, upkeep, go to combat, right? And then you have your main phase, right? If I said that that card costed 5 mana, right, like 3 and double white, and you have like a 3/3, what rarity do you think it would be? Or like, if I had said like, hey, here's a counterspell that costs 2 generic and a blue, and it's just straight up, counter any spell, right? So it's like a more cost efficient form of cancel because it's one less blue pip, right? Would that be a common or an uncommon, right? And I think that, like, for most players who've played Commander or just Magic in general for like at least 3 years or longer and have been very enfranchised at this point, they're pretty good at eyeballing these things when you just throw like card text at them and tell them, hey, do you think this is a rare or like a common? What I think is actually funny is the fact that like they're good at telling you like, I think this is a common or an uncommon or a rare. What they're not particularly, what's funny is that they're not aware of like, hey, there's a pattern here of cards that, like, or actually identifying what that pattern is, of like, this is what makes a card a rare, this is what makes a card a common, this is what makes a card an uncommon. And if they don't, and by not being aware of it, they become a little bit absent-minded of like, what it is in Popper, right? So that when they, play Popper and then someone, plays a spell on them that, that they might feel like, uh let's see, oubliette is a common, right?
It is. It
Sure
is.
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Well,
So I believe it's banned in
It
PDH.
it is not.
Uh,
We only have
it is
two.
not.
We only have two banned cards
It's
currently.
Okay.
1v1
Yeah,
PDH.
one
But
v
Okay.
one. But we only have Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora currently banned. But
for
Unfortunately.
comments.
yeah, let me hit you with this, Charles, because you're bringing up some fantastic points. And actually, a few of our most recent downshifts are actually exactly what you're talking about, right? So, a
Mhm,
card, I'm not sure if you know it or not, but it's called Demon's Disciple. It's just a
mhm.
3 mana, 3/1 human creature. And it says when it enters the battlefield, each opponent, I'm sorry, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker.
Mhm.
We had
Oh yeah.
yeah, we had three of those in format already. That gives us a fourth. So what Wizards has been doing recently for Pauper is that we keep getting this consistency factor with these cards. So like
Hmm.
we got Ren's Resolve, right?
Hmm.
And then we just
Yep.
keep getting Reckless Impulse, and now we have two, and they continue this over and over and over, and it's becoming common, yeah, common now for us.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because our decks are powering up more and more and more through this. So like our redundancy factors are now like reaching real limits, right? So like these 98 card decks, because partners and backgrounds are very very crucial to our format, are getting play sets of cards and play sets,
Hmm.
and not even like a play set now, like Gretchen has what, 9 untappers or some absurd amount at this point.
I think I'm on 12 untappers and 10 land enchantments or something.
Yeah, so like our redundancy is going through the roof now. So it's insane, right? Because on paper, like even Dylan here, he was talking about it, how he decided to play Third Path, which, right, Third Path is an insane absurd card. And as your commander, you would just naturally think that card is busted. But
Hmm.
cards like Electrickery are in our
Mhm.
format and are very,
Oh, it's really really good.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really really good.
Insanely good. I found that out for sure.
Yeah, well, like, yeah, it's well, what I was getting at it is that yeah, it is like I would say that it's almost like you're playing a friend's cube,
Mhm.
like, and your friend's cube has, and you're thinking like a limited player, but this isn't like your dad's like standard limited set. Right, there's going to be like infinite combos in the cube and things like that where people can string along together. And so, yeah, while the aggro strategy, is certainly viable and such, right? You do need to be considerate of the fact that in both spectrums of it, actually, it's like the aggro strategy is viable, but you could potentially just get blown out by a combo. Yes, there are infinite combos in here, but it's not like you're playing with power where you have all the available resources to you, and you could get blown out by the fact that all your creatures only have one toughness. You know,
Yep.
and it's because, again, it goes back to that question of what makes a card a common, right?
Oh yeah.
And there is like a rubric, there is a guideline for this, and the that rubric just kind of gets ignored when they do Horizon Master sets and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
uh yeah,
It's very noticeable. It's very noticeable.
yeah.
Like
Yeah, yeah. When someone nowadays, I almost want this to be like, when someone's like, that card is a common, right? I almost want the instead of like
yeah.
that shock exasperated question, instead of it just being like, that card's a common, instead I just wanted to be like, was that printed in a Horizon set?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It should have been the response then.
Well,
Right?
here's a good one for you both, right? So, Generous Gift was just downshifted. We didn't get Beast Within, but we got Generous Gift.
Yeah.
Your perspectives, is that a good card? Like, would you think that card is a staple for the format?
So, if I put on like my limited thinking cap, I think that card is actually like dangerous. Not in the sense like, oh, it's overpowered dangerous, is like, oh, it's gonna get abused, but like I think it's actually dangerous to be played. Like if you have this like Vindicate instant speed in hand, you're like, oh yeah, I have a Vindicate instant speed in hand. Like, dude, you're literally giving someone like a free 3/3.
Yeah.
And they're like, how bad could it be? And it's like, well, if you're playing like regular battle cruiser commander, maybe it doesn't sound that bad. But like exactly like what you mentioned, like some of the other creatures are like 2/2s or like 3 mana 2/2s or 3 mana like
Yeah.
3/1s and stuff. Like a 3/3 is actually chonky.
Yeah.
And the thing is that it's free for your opponent. It's almost as if like you like just said like, hey, it's similar to like in cEDH, like the discussions that people have with arcane denial, right?
Oh
You
yeah.
give your opponent a free card, you draw 2 cards, you counter their spell, right? And there's always that like debate of like, oh yeah, but that's like a free card for your opponent, that's really bad and all that stuff. I would actually put it at the same level as arcane denial. Like it's really good, it gets rid of something problematic. But the advantage that you give your opponent, like the 3/3 actually is a relevant stat line, I think,
Fair.
in Popper.
What are your thoughts on it, Dylan?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's also sneakily a lot of ways for them to abuse that creature that aren't just combat. Dargo fodder. There's a bunch of random things. I feel like a big thing that I found when I started playing, or when I played my little bit of cPDH, is that the synergy of your cards is a lot more, like Charles was saying, almost like you are drafting a limit or a cube. Raw power is sometimes not as important as the way that the cards fit together. And if you're giving that 3/3 to a deck that can really abuse it, you're putting yourself at a major disadvantage.
Yep. I mean, that's
Yeah.
exactly what. So the whole community kind of like blew up when that card was printed, right? Because it's our first like instant speed. But then like the more we all delve into it, we were like, I even started looking because I play white, a ton of different white decks, and I just looked at it and I was like, well, if I give them a blocker, I can't kill them, and if I do,
Yeah.
and I'm like, but that's not, and then but I just I got lost with what I was trying to do with the card. I was like, I can't fit this or slot this in any of my decks. Like,
Yeah.
this is insane to me.
Yeah, and what I understand to be one of the best decks in the format, like the Gut Leader deck, uh, that deck wins off of 4/1 skeletons.
Correct.
Mm.
Right. So giving them a 3/3 to get rid of their gut and answer it temporarily is just adding more fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
And it seems like combat is a very serious problem.
Yeah, that is something that I think cPDH kind of has a little bit more exclusively than cEDH. I don't know if you guys want to help me out with that statement, but that is what I'm basing that on is just pure combat, right? We do have several decks in the format that are 100% combat based. Like we have a card called Loyal Subordinate. It's one of the lieutenant cycles, and it says at the beginning of your combat phase, each opponent loses 3 life, and
Mm.
it's a 3 mana black zombie, and it's a zombie tribal deck. It's like turn one dark rit, slam this dude out there, and you just go off to the races. The deck's supposed to kill you by turn 5 or 6 on average, and every creature, I know this is might not sound too exciting, but every creature in the deck has come into play. Each opponent loses 2 life, you gain one
Yeah,
life,
yeah, yeah.
and like the whole synergy
It's
behind that deck is doing that. So
yeah, it's the age old sulfuric vortex strat, right?
yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
and it's really powerful because sulfuric vortex hit your opponent at 10% of their starting life total, which is exactly what this is. Because if correct me if I'm wrong, it's a 30 life system, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, and so if they're losing 3 life a turn, that's 10% of their life total. And then every time you hit them with like an incremental like ETB drain 2, gain some amount of life, like that's literally like a lightning helix, right? Where
Oh yeah.
there's like I played like back in like old Kamigawa standard, and people often talk about like Kokusho, the Evening Star,
Oh, that
and
card
one of
was
the things,
busted. That card was
yeah, yeah.
busted.
I mean, it was banned in Commander for a while too, for
Yep.
similar reasons. Because the idea was that like, oh, everyone's losing 5 life, and it's like, no, that's actually a 10 life total differential. You lose 5, I gain 5, right? And there's a huge tempo swing to that. So I think that that's a really cool idea. It does actually sound exciting to me. Because like the philosophy and execution of it, as Dylan was saying, is very synergistic. And uh, do we have, or does cPDH have like a deck that runs like the initiative?
We've
Yes.
got so Rail, Passageway, Seer are the two big ones that have access to it in the command zone.
Hmm.
But there are other decks that are also just really combat oriented and playing every monarch and initiative common that we have.
Yeah,
Though
Yeah,
there are some.
I actually
yeah,
have a
those.
turbo initiative deck, which is Amber Grizza Omal, which I'm not sure if you know that card, but it was from
Hmm.
Commander Legends Baldur's Gate, and she's just a red. I have her red black paired with her background, so literally it's like turn one I play a 1 mana creature. She's similar to like a Timna of our format. It'd be a pretty good
Mhm.
comparison. And I just go turn one creature, turn two culling the weak, slam an initiative creature down, dump my
Mhm.
hand, play Amber, reload my hand while I have the initiative, and stay aggressive at my opponents. So
Yeah. The initiative is very, very, very powerful. Like just the Undercity, the last part where you like get a creature with like 3 extra power and toughness and hexproof until your
Oh, the
next
Throne
turn.
of the Dead.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's quite the blowout, and also yeah, there's just so much free game actions to it. It reminds me of like Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Limited with sagas, because I remember like a lot of people just really dunked on sagas on their initial impression. Like Era of Enlightenment was like the 2 man sagas, like this seems like not great, but then they played it in limited and it's like, oh wait, no, I get all 3 of these things and I
oh
don't
yeah.
yeah, and I don't even really need to do anything in that process of doing it. And then yeah, and then you get like a first striker on the other side. I find it that like in cPDH versus cEDH in terms of combat, um I think that cPDH definitely highlights certain attributes more in about like combat than cEDH does. Like in both formats, they do care about like, and I emphasize this in cEDH a lot is like you do want to be considerate about like keyword abilities like trample, haste, vigilance, first strike. Most people like are already like really good about like recognizing haste because it's such a combo based keyword ability to
Yeah.
like throw something down, tap it immediately, yada yada. So no one really needs to be preached to about like haste. But vigilance, for example, is especially if it's like multiplayer, is crazy. But even in like 1v1, it's also very problematic. Gavin Verhey has done videos talking about like why Wizards has designed fewer and fewer creatures with first strike over the years. Actually, it's a great
Okay.
video to check out and understand. Like these are actually like I think great videos if you ever want to exercise your brain about like the limited slash popper style type of formats and understanding like why is this card not a common? Why is this card an uncommon? What would happen if this card's a common? Why is this card so powerful? Like as a common, even though its power and toughness is comparable to other common cards, but this one keyword ability makes it like ridiculously powerful. Like, and going back to like what you were saying, Dylan, about the deck that runs a bunch of 4/1s, it actually made me think about the Undercity's 4/1 skeletons because they had the keyword ability Menace, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
like,
what Gut does. Is it makes 4/1
Menace
yes,
Menace
Tokens.
Skeletons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like literally, how hard is it once you take the initiative from that person? How hard is it to defend yourself from them taking it back with a 4/1 menace skeleton?
Yeah,
Right?
it's
Yeah.
impossible. It's funny you say that, right? Because I have some friends of mine that make a joke about the skeletons, and so Gut is paired with a card called Inspiring Leader, which gives all tokens
Yeah.
+2/+2.
Plus two.
So
Yep. Yep.
so he says, you could block the 4/1, but as soon as you put Inspiring Leader out in play, they're essentially unblockable. Who's
Yeah.
blocking a 6/3? It's just you're just murdering everyone's creatures for the price of nothing, and it's yeah, very
It's
aggressive.
it's really funny because then they're gonna need then they're gonna need multiple generous gifts to
Yeah.
stop it because like 1/3/3 can't even
Six
block
sixes.
it because of the menace.
Yep.
Yeah, notably in if you generous gift a gut and they have inspiring leader in play, you just gave them a 5/5.
Yeah.
So like
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the inspiring leader gives your commander the ability, so you would
yeah,
have to
yeah,
replay.
gut still
Yeah,
has to be in play.
yeah,
But
yeah. But it is just a really powerful card advantage there because
Oh yeah.
even without gut, they still have the 3/3 out. They're still tempoing you. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, this goes back to exactly what we were saying about with like power toughness, keyword abilities and stuff like yeah, and all this stuff I think like if you play like a lot of limited, I think that this will be very 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 exciting for you to see and like what's uh and particularly it scratches a certain itch. It's the itch that like you went to a pre-release, you built a really bomb pre-release sealed deck. You went like 4 or 5-0 with this bomb pre-release sealed deck, and you're like, I never want to take this apart, right? And I think that that is what like PDH or just Popper is in general, is that idea like, wow, this is so cool, and I want to like play other decks at that same power level. I want to keep playing this really cool deck that I built, and stuff. And I feel like that is actually like a really good gateway into it. I've been told that like Pauper is like a bit of a Wild West format right now. There's a lot. So there is like an established list of like, hey, these are like some of the most powerful cards and stuff, but in terms of data and stuff, like, getting people acclimated and adjusted to playing this format, there's a lot to learn still before we have anything really conclusive to say. We can have speculations, like, Abdel is seems to be like really, really, really good, and but like, is it really like the best deck or something like that?
Mhm.
Uh, yeah. And I think that part of that comes from experimentation, and I think that that might be a really great way, especially if you're like trying to brew your own popper deck, or you're trying out an idea. I think like going back to that like fundamental question of like, hey, what is a common, you know, worth in a format, and understanding like the philosophy of what makes a card a common, and then when does that, principle get excluded, right? Like I would probably just go on Scryfall right now and just be like, okay, right? I think that, this certain ability, like an edict effect, right, is deservedly a common effect. Like it can be a common. So I'm going to look up how many edict effects there are. And Chris, you said there are like now 4 or something like that.
Well, on a
Uh,
creature, so
yeah,
there
on a
Three
on
creature.
a
mana.
Yeah.
creature, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Like
but like
it's
exactly, right? Like someone, if you're like new to the format and you don't know much going in, I think you could start off like just asking yourself that question, especially if you're an experienced Magic player but you just don't really like play Popper and such, or you're never concerned about rarity. You could just ask yourself that question of like, what is this worth at in terms of rarity? And then you can go through this process where like, okay, cool, well, I have a really good idea of these kinds of things, play some games, get blown out when someone plays a card from like Modern Horizons or like Commander Masters, and then
yep,
you're like, okay, well, I guess that card is a common now,
yep.
and even like peruse the list of commons from those sets, and you can set those cards as like the anchor points in your deck of like, hey, I want to build around this kind of thing. Similar to like Inspiring Leader is like an insane uncommon. Adela Adrian is also a really, really powerful uncommon.
Yep.
Yeah, they're I mean like even like uh uh what you call it, March of Machines, Phyrexian Censor. I looked at that card and it's like, wow,
Yeah.
this is so powerful, considering that they printed like Phyrexian commons as well, and
Yep.
so you can already like break parity on there, and yeah, this is insane.
Well, kind of switching gears a little bit. Unless Puzzle, you got anything to add for us, or
I was gonna ask Dylan, um, did you brew your TPI list from scratch, or did you base it off of someone else's list?
Yeah, so I took the deck and I found the commons that I thought would be good. And I think when I originally started, I was thinking more of like a good stuff perspective than I was like attacking the meta, and thinking about more the synergy. And then Chris actually ended up sending me his list that he had brewed at some point. And I think once I started playing it, I started discovering the power of cards like Deprive. 2 blue, counter a spell, return a card to your hand as part of the cost, and combining that with stuff like Mystic Sanctuary or Hoodwink, which was a card that I've never seen before in my life. 1 in a blue instant, return target artifact, creature, or land to my hand.
yep.
And I just couldn't really understand why it would be good until I faced up against a Gretchen with a land and 3 land enchantments on it. And it all kind of started to come together. And I think limited really came to mind when I started getting into those games and understanding like I'm not here to play the most powerful spells. I'm here to chain together these commons that bring me ultimately to the end of my game plan. Right. Like I don't have the bombs that I traditionally would have in cEDH. I don't have like that ad nauseum. I don't have that like underworld breach. I need to combine these cards together in order to get to a critical mass. Even the fastest combo decks I've seen.
Yep.
Yeah, synergy is very important. But go ahead and take it away with your next topic, Chris.
So I have one which I'm not sure. I know Dylan, you did actually play in the first Sanctuary event, like you were saying earlier. But we actually have something comparable to the Mox Masters in the format, Charles, and that is called the
Mhm.
Sanctuary. It's essentially identical. So I just wanted to bring that up so you kind of had a little bit of backstory on that. But here's a kind of a strange little tidbit. If you're not comfortable saying it, Dylan, it's perfectly fine. But how much does your deck roughly cost? Because you're a big blue farm player, and
Yeah.
you actually own the entire list. You don't have any proxies. You dual lands, everything. It's all there. So
I mean, I think you could build my list without the foils and Japanese foils and bling and whatever else for probably close to $4,000. I think
okay,
all said and done. But I mean, that's obviously restrictive,
yeah,
right? You're talking about Mox Diamond, LED, set of the duels, and the duels I think are a little overrated. I think a lot of cEDH players kind of get a little overly in their head about not having the duels. Obviously, they're the best targets you could ask for. You're not taking
mm-hmm.
life. You're not making any other deck building concessions, but you definitely can build a deck without them. But when it comes to the fast mana and then your counterspell packages, that's really where you start seeing that price point affect your efficiency at a higher level.
Yeah. And I just wanted to bring that up because obviously we have here our local game stores um, do not allow proxies. They'll do like one proxy event every so often, but we have to bring a real deck. We have to show up and present it and be like, yeah. Now they don't look, but you know they hope you have integrity, right? You know
Scout's
what I mean?
honor, right?
Yeah, that all your cards are real. But you know our average deck is around $50 to $75. It's not too expensive, which gives me the hope that there's potential for one day for Wizards to actually, you know, see us and be like, well, their whole deck is real. You know, we could support this format. But it also scares me in a sense as well because it is on the cheaper side. So what are you gonna give for a prize, right? Am I gonna spend $40 at a tournament and my deck is $35, right? So I just paid more to enter an event than actually build my deck entirely. So like
Mhm.
there's a give and take that I'm trying to like figure out over time. What are your guys' thoughts on that? Do you think this is a like a healthy for the new players to even get into, right? Because our price point is pretty low. I mean, incredibly low in my opinion.
I think it's good for if you are well. I almost don't want to even talk to the players. I would talk to the store owner instead about this,
Mhm.
right? Because if you're running a no proxy allowed tournament, uh, uh, then you have to think about in terms of like the cause and effect of it, right? Like how many people would attend your tournament, how many people would play in the tournament, like what's your entry fee, kind of like what you brought up, Chris. um I think that uh if you're a community organizer and you're trying to get as many people as you can to enjoy Commander as a whole, right? Like the DH part, right? The Dragon Highlander part of the game, then you might want to encourage like playing, Popper DH, PDH a lot because it is like the price point is very accessible. It's from what I've experienced or seen, it feels really fun. It seems really fun, right? And it's also a great way, like I mentioned, like you just racked up a great pre-release. You enjoyed what you were playing. Hey, you really like that common and all that stuff, like or your favorite uncommon is there, like you really liked how Phyrexian Sensor was being played in, March of Machines. Well, guess what? You can use that as your commander in cPDH, right? And I feel like from an organizer standpoint, I think that there's a lot there for cPDH for your people to explore and see. But in terms of like getting the price points, I mean, like, yeah, I don't know what you would have as a prize in terms of like wants, but if I was like say a game store owner, I would probably just build a whole ecosystem around it. Like I would run like cPDH events, and the prizes would actually be like staples into uh like cEDH, like you win a fetch land or something like that. And
Yeah.
so then it feels like it's really really worth it, where and it's such a really good player pipeline where you get to hone your fundamental skills on like commander at the limited level of like, hey, this is how synergy works. Hey, like this is why this card is so good at this like rarity, or hey, this is why menace is so terrifying, or like why vigilance is so annoying to play against, etc. And then you build those fundamental understandings. You win cards you win cards because you're rewarded for your understanding of those fundamentals, and then you can play those cards in like higher powered games, because I think that in cDH a lot of the time like experienced cDH players bemoan, or even like just really like skilled, highly skilled, not even experienced but just highly skilled cDH players bemoan the fact that like some cDH players don't even know what the steps are in the combat phase.
Yeah.
uh,
That is very
uh,
true. That is very
yeah
true.
and yeah, and so
The
as a
attack and the
community.
Timna phase.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like, yeah, I think that like PDH and cPDH can help is fundamental to that in like a Magic player's career. Like I think that if you're a cDH player but you are very turned off by the price point of it, like you go to like your local game store's event organizer only runs cDH events, which you can't really participate, or you can't really play to the best of your abilities. I think that there is a place for you. I think that there is an opportunity for you to petition to them and be, or appeal to them and be like, hey, why not run? We don't want you. There's a reason why game store owners don't necessarily want proxy friendly events, because the part of it is just and
Well,
I don't
they
know if there's like any channel that actually talks about this. Like I feel like there's almost like a thing that like people like know but they don't say on like podcasts or whatever. So I don't know why,
well, I
but
mean,
like
they lose
yeah.
their status, right? Like that
Yeah.
is that like and I agree with you. I actually don't know if many people even say that, but yeah, like the store can lose its status. So it's very important for them to
Yeah.
not do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
for
so,
WPN store, they have to log a certain amount of events,
mhm.
right?
They can't
So
count
if
on the
they're
third.
running a bunch of cEDH events and those are sanctioned events in your line proxies, you run into an issue where you could be losing your WPN status, which is pretty dramatic for a local game store.
Yeah.
Yes, and it affects other things in terms of like what product they receive and how early you can pre-order things and such. And so, and it does basically come back to affect the players in that way.
Yep.
Uh, and so if your local game store is by the books in many ways, like they probably should be, if like it's just you know this is my legal statement to wizards. But like uh yeah, so your local game store doing the local game store thing, like you could appeal to them and be like, hey, why not have this infrastructure instead, right? And I think
Uh,
that there is a really nice niche for that, that especially if you are like the type of competitive player who wants to feel rewarded for competition for like competitive play and not necessarily like on this pay to win bracket.
Yep.
Because as much as like skill is a contributing factor to a lot of things, there is going to be like a huge differential slide if you're playing tapped lands in a blue farm list versus
Yeah.
someone who's playing dual lands in a blue farm list, right?
I mean,
And
We
yeah.
actually have that comparison right now. A lot of the people in our format actually have moved away from tapped lands just in general for color fixings
mhm.
and things of that nature. Because like if you decide, just like Dylan was saying earlier with Dargo, if you decide to put a tap lane into play against my Dargo, you have just died. You've just gotten run over by a Dargo. So
The difference is we're not playing. People weren't playing them because they couldn't afford $500 lands.
correct. This
So
was
Correct.
my
that's the difference
choice.
in
Yeah,
this
this was
conversation. But regardless,
Yeah,
yeah.
you guys leave those up on purpose.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
So here's a good one for you guys because we're kind of already delving into it, and I think this is actually a pretty big topic to talk about. The difficulty between formats. So when I started Popper many years ago, like the cPDH format, like my first deck was Crackling Drake, and I thought the Popper format was going to be super easy, and yeah, I was so wrong. This was back in the era with like just everyone was control and combo control, and you were playing for 4.5 hours, right? Like you were like, man, I hope I play at Denny's tonight so I could get some eggs while I'm playing this game. Like, but the difficulty between the formats, I think, is there with the both of them, right? Because I've seen Dylan play a million times now at the local game store. So when I see a player like him just be able to pilot Blue Farm so simply, I expect him. I expect maybe the wrong word, but I almost expect him to come into the Popper format and kind of like easy transition. But I mean, what do you think your transition was when you started playing a few games with that TPI? Like, I didn't think it
Yeah,
was too too smooth for you overall, personally. But
I think I 0-2-1 dropped. I'm pretty sure.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think the problem is the the steps of the game work differently, right? Like the goals you're trying to accomplish in each phase of the game for a cPDH list, like thinking about TPI versus a deck like Timnacrom, are very different, right? Um, in Timnacrom, and I think for a lot of cEDH decks that like utilize combat, um, the combat is used differently and it's used as a resource, right? When I'm attacking with Najila, I'm accumulating resources that eventually bring me to an infinite combo, right? When I'm attacking with Tivit, it's the same thing. I'm accumulating resources. Attacking with Timna, attacking with Kram, same concept, right? Yes, there is the level of like life pressuring, but at the end of the day, what you're trying to get to a specific endpoint goal in your combo. For the most part, for most cEDH decks, that's what the point of most of those decks are, right? Is getting to the endpoint of a combo. And for cPDH, I found that I tried to brew TPI comboless, thinking that the format would be a lot slower. Um, but ultimately, I found that I wasn't able to outrace the dedicated combo decks and keep the control that you might be able to in a 1v1 game of Popper, right? So the same heuristics applied, where playing control in cEDH is a lot of one for ones where two people are uninvolved, and that becomes even more exacerbated when there's two other opponents and your counter spells cost 3 to 2 mana, right? So those are things that I found personally playing the format. Um, is this the tempo of the games felt a lot different.
yep.
I think I want to talk about this one a little bit, to be honest, because I played some cEDH, but
Yeah,
honestly, I haven't played in a while, because life situations and all that jazz. But I think an interesting difference between cPDH and cEDH is where the complexity lies. I think both formats are complex, but in cEDH, a lot of that complexity is held in how much a single card is capable of doing and how much text is on that card, yada yada, all that stuff. But like just the ability of a single card coming down and winning the game is so much higher in that format than it is in
Yeah.
cPDH, where it's how your entire deck interacts with each other, and it takes multiple cards to get there. Whereas, in cEDH, you have to play a lot more counter spells and stuff because you can't let Underworld Breach resolve, right? Like, that's just never happening. Whereas we still play plenty of counter spells and interaction, but in our format, for instance, basically every combo needs a creature to stick. So against combo decks, creature removal is almost a form of counter spell. Not quite, because we have flicker combo and stuff where the value is all on ETBs. So you can kill it in response, but it's not quite the same as countering a Peregrine Drake, right? They still get to untap their lands, but
Yep.
That was a problem I felt, definitely, that like I would see 4 different cards that on the surface level looked benign. But once the engine got turned on, I was unable to stop it. Right.
Yeah.
And it's trying to identify like those threats is difficult when you're dealing with commons you've probably never seen before. Right.
I mean, it
I think that
was.
there's a. Oh,
Oh,
go ahead.
well, I was just gonna bring up. It was similar to the game that we were playing, Charles, where I played the escape routes against you guys, and y'all were like, "Is that an escape route?" And I'm like, "Yeah." You're like, "What? What? Okay." Haven't seen that card since Plane Shift, so it was just a very interesting thing. But go for it, Charles.
Yeah. So combining a couple of things that we've talked about the multiplicity of cards, like so many cards have similar text and similar effects, and so you can play like play sets of them, whereas you might not have that luxury in cEDH. And then on the other side of cEDH, where there are like uh, so many cards that have this particular impact that you almost have to have like a directory in your head of like this is the deck, these are the cards to look out for this deck, right? And this is this other deck, these are the cards to look out for in that deck, right? Like if I'm looking at like a Dargo list in cDH, it's like, okay, well, I need to look out for these specific alter effects or like food chain or something like that. Or if I'm playing against Owl the Dawn Skies, same thing, altars and stuff. I'm playing against like Blue Farm or like uh or Rogsai. I'm thinking of like Underworld Breach, Demonic Consultation, Thassa's Oracle, etc. And so it's a one-to-one card mapping. Whereas I think like in uh cPDH, and this is my impression of it, is the fact that I'm not really thinking of any one particular card. I'm thinking of a class of cards instead. And going to like what Dylan was saying earlier about like uh, each card seems really benign until the engine is assembled. At that point, it might be too late. And I think that that is something that's really interesting, is because I think that if you're coming from the play perspective of a cDH player who's like, oh, this is the card that I need to counter, right? It's almost like that heuristic is just I don't want to be uh condescending, but it's the word that's coming to my mind right now. A very brain dead response, essentially, of
For
like,
sure. Yeah.
it was like, hey, here's A, and then there's the B, so A plus B counter. All right, C for counter,
Yeah.
and but in uh but in cPDH, from what it sounds like, is that you actually have to be very discreet. It's like, hey, this person's playing this card. What does this card do? Do I care about this? Right? It doesn't immediately come into your mind like, oh, I need to counter this, because your opponent runs multiple copies of that effect, right? And
Yep.
so, and you look at the board, it's like, well, this will be like the third one that they cast. Is it important that it is the third one that they cast? Or is it like, oh, it's the third copy of it, but the combo or the engine requires like 4 other pieces and they just hit another duplicate piece, you know? And and so you're more mindful. And what's interesting is that, like, you have a lot of interaction, and your interaction is more flexible here. It's not like you need a specific counter spell or you need a specific stacks piece per se. Like, removal is more flexible in this particular situation. But and so you're allowed to, take a guess on, should I interact with this, and you can fail on that guess, but it's not like you blew away your one piece of interaction, right? I think it's more interactive this way, but it's more discreet at the same time.
Yeah, you're touching on basically exactly what I'm trying to get at, and I couldn't figure out how to put into words. I think a lot of the complexity of cEDH takes place in that one turn, whereas in cPDH, it's dragged out over multiple turns, especially with a lot of our combos that require summoning sickness to no longer be a thing. So a lot of our combo pieces will sit in play for a turn before anything happens. So even for the combo decks, there's a lot more build up. Whereas in cEDH, the complexity is he tutored last turn. I have to hold up 4 mana.
Yeah.
Right.
And being able to acknowledge that and know that you have to be able to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and that was a complicated thing that I felt, is that I wanted to keep holding up counter spells. It was two things. I was worried about the assembling of like an A plus B, right? Because I just don't know the combos. I don't. When I see something that untaps a land and has cost 4 mana and has a bunch of other seemingly nonsensical text, I know that's some kind of combo piece, right? So if this is a 1v1 format, I probably would be answering that, right?
Yep.
In terms of just tempo, getting rid of a threat. But with the two other players, I have to, in my cEDH brain, have to consider that there has to be another piece coming that's going to be worse than that. And the next piece comes and it's not. It's just as benign, and it just kind of piles on, and it forces you to find the actual interaction point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that interaction point is not going to be obvious. It's not as obvious as, like, oh, he's casting intuition. Oh, I know exactly what 3 cards they're going to get, right? Whereas here they're like, hey, here's a mole drifter, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mole
Does
Drifter
that do
is
anything?
sauce. Oh man.
yeah,
Mole Drifter sauce in this format.
It's a
Yeah.
worm newt in my Abdel deck.
Yep.
Figure it
yeah.
out.
Yep.
You just look at that card and you're just like,
What is happening? Yep.
yeah. You're just
Yeah.
like, are they
Yeah.
going to, are they going for? Is this just value? Like, whereas, like, no one, like if someone plays intuition, like, this is a value intuition, like 70%
They're
they're
lying.
lying. Yeah, yeah. Whereas someone's like playing Mole Drifter, and it's like, is like the little, like, Leonardo DiCaprio Inception meme where he's squinting his eyes really hard. And it's like, is that really?
See,
Oh yeah.
that's a funny
combo?
thing because in cEDH, if somebody played a Muldrifter against me, I'm gonna take a second and be like, "What in the hell are they doing with that Muldrifter?"
Yeah.
Right? When I see, I found this when I first played against Tayam, right? The first time I saw an Acacian Money Changer get played against me, and I had to
Oh, yeah.
remember there's credit counters and it deals damage,
Yep.
and against a good player, my alarm bells should start ringing.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a weird card. There's a reason why.
Right.
Yeah. If your opponent, if you're playing in, like, the top 16 match, and your opponent plays a card that you think is a bad card, or a card that makes you question, like, why does this card exist? Chances, or like, why is this card even in the deck? Chances are that card is going to kick your butt.
It's gonna win the game. Yeah.
Literally the Wormfang Newt. I mean, Puzzle already said it. Like, that's a. Do you know the Wormfang Newt, Charles? Like, or
No, I don't
it's
know
from
this one.
I
so
don't
it's
either. Yeah.
so do you know? Obviously, you guys know World Gorger Dragon.
Mhm.
That was a whole series of them
Yeah.
in Judgment.
Mhm.
So Wormfang Newt is the 2 mana
It's the green one,
variant.
right?
No, it's the blue one. It's the two
The blue
mana
one, okay.
Newt. It's a 2 mana 2/2, and it says you got to exile a land. But the combo
Okay.
in my Abdel deck is that I exile Mystic Sanctuary and I loop it with Abdel and keep putting the flicker on top of the library and just keep cycling through the deck. But I've put that into play against people. They're like, "Why are you exiling a land?" And I'm like, "It's like an arcane signet, guys. It's an arcane signet." They're like, huh. And then I'll play a Mystic Sanctuary next turn, and the blink process starts, and all of a sudden the engine's going, and everybody's like,
Yep. Yep.
"Oh no, what did we just let resolve?" Like,
Mm-hmm.
think so.
Yeah, it's really sneaky because what you're doing there is that you're distracting your opponents because um, again it's that card class classification because you have like a lean in relic order effect on a land
Yep.
and there but like multiple people can think of multiple creatures or multiple artifacts that specifically multiple creatures that like an animate dead would interact with, like World Gorge Dragon or Lean and Relic Order, etc. And in regards to Lean and Relic Order, multiple people can think of multiple enchantments and artifacts that it interacts with. But if
Oh
you
yeah.
play like a card like that in Pauper specifically, right? What is and this goes back to that question that asks like what makes a card justified as a common, right? There
Oh yeah.
aren't many like blow like like tremendous lands that you could think of that are at the common rarity, and so I can totally see that flying completely under the radar for your opponents, and they completely
Yep.
forget that Mystic Sanctuary is a common,
Which
because
is
like the
crazy, by
moment,
the way.
yeah,
Yeah.
Or an
yeah,
Eldraine was a set.
uh,
yeah,
yeah, there are some pretty wild cards. I mean, the most recent set, right? Like you were talking about earlier, we have some. I mean, Dread Return was downshifted. Like they just
oh my
skipped the
god,
gap. Like I was like, oh well, and I had a huge conversation with Puzzle about it, where I was like, no, we're getting Zombify. We'll get other ones first, or we'll get the 5 mana one. Like one of those, sure. And then they just went straight to the end of the road and gave us Dread Return, and I was
Yeah,
like,
I
what is?
want Shred Return so bad. He's like, it'll never happen.
Yeah, and
But
Yeah,
it's
you
so
know it's funny.
cool.
Sorry, go ahead.
oh, go for it.
I was gonna say it's funny because when I saw that happen, they downshifted Dread Return and then also downshifted Lolith Giant,
Yeah,
oh.
which is the one that right. Um, and then Balustrade Spy is also a proper legal card.
Hmm.
And in my head, I'm like, there can't be an oops all spells popper deck. That's ridiculous.
We
Until I saw
have
Michael Levine's list that
yeah,
he put on Twitter with Arc Ritual, Lotus Petal, Simian Spirit Guide, Elvish Spirit Guide, Land Grant, One Forest, and it
yep.
kind of all clicked like these are commons. Like when you, in the totality of them, when you put them all together, is just ridiculous. The power level you could reach when all those cards are combined together is is nuts. Dread Return is a nonsensical card to be a common,
Well,
really, when you think about it.
it's similar to what we're all kind of talking about, right? Like when the engine starts going in Dread Return, to me, the fact that they gave us that kind of just turns your engine into overdrive, right? Because once again, going back to Abdel, now I play white black Abdel, and if you kill the Abdel, I put it in the yard, I cast Dread Return. Even if you counter that, I'm just gonna sack the soldiers I made, get Abdel back into play, and you lose the game, right? Like it's just the fact that they're giving us like our power is going through the roof, right? With cards that they're continuing to print for us and print for us. So I'm I'm excited. I'm very
Hmm.
excited. So
think it's also nice that some of these downshifts make cards or combos that have existed in the format viable to some extent. Like we've had a Nomad's Ilkor combo. We've had that in the 5 mana version of Cephalid Illusionist. I don't remember what its name is, but it's whenever it gets targeted, mill two.
Yep.
So we have an infinite mill combo, and there was just not really a great way to abuse it. And now, granted, you still have to be an Esper Plus to use it, but we now have Dread Return in our format, and we can go, all right, mill my library, reanimate Archaeomancer, get back a reanimation, reanimate Paragon Trick. I don't know. Like, we've
yeah,
got stuff
Yeah,
now, and it just makes,
Acorn Harvest.
yeah,
yeah,
like all that
Squirrel.
random stuff.
yep, yeah. The synergy is a big key factor that I've really loved. I mean, some of the best aggro decks in the format are tribal. They're like commanders doesn't matter, but they're tribal goblins. Like the synergy we have with goblins is insane. The same with zombies, right? Like Shepherd of Rot is a real card. Like and that just brings me back to like what you were saying in the beginning, Charles. Like it brings me back to my old days where I used to play zombies back in the day. Like I drafted a like Shepherd of Rot, and I'm able to like make everyone lose a life, and like it's so much fun for me. And you know, I digress on that one, but you know, I had to bring it up. I love Shepherd of Rot.
I'll probably dabble in cPDH later in the future soon. I know Chris has been trying to get me into it, and I mean, like I really do like Phyrexian Sensor. Uh, so
I mean, that
To
deck
see,
is. No, go for it, Puzzle.
see, I'm just saying, I'd love to see what some cEDH minds bring to the format. You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I was going to say, what would you recommend? Um, Thinking about some of the more popular cEDH decks. I know whenever I talk to Chris, he's always selling me on Azorius Abdel as the blue farm of cPDH to try to entice me to get into it. So, what would you kind of recommend for cEDH players looking to approach with an established list?
Yeah. So I do think Azorius Abdel is probably a pretty good comparison for our format for Blue Farm. It's just kind of the
yeah, Abdel is like the
game
Crom
value.
of that format.
Yeah, like
Like
Yeah,
just
yeah.
that
play
that
each.
that that body, like
Yeah, make
Oh
bodies,
man.
all that stuff. We've got Gretchen for our Thrasios.
Yeah.
That one's a pretty direct comparison. We've got Malcolm. If you like Malcolm, he's an uncommon.
Yeah.
You don't get Glinthorn, but you get all of the Reckless Fireweaver, turn it into a pirate combo. We have
Oh, Sapphire Charm and stuff, right? Is
yeah,
that the
Trickery Charm is the one that does
right?
it. We've got like 7 creature type changing effects and like 10 pingers. You can go crazy with Malcolm.
Well, specifically
That's
Malcolm Puzzle, here's a good one for you. You pair it with literally anything. Like it's you could pair it with Dargo, you could pair it with Togo for crying out loud if you wanted to, but like Kedis, Breaches. Breaches is pretty absurd if you like controlling the game. Like it's a curiosity control deck, right? Like it's pretty exciting. But
yeah. What else do we have in cEDH that has a
God Leader
decent
seems like kind of Najila esque, right? Or Winota
yeah?
esque. I mean, I guess kind of a combo of those.
I always like
I
comparing that
don't.
to Winota because it has like Standard Bearer and Suture Priest, which kind of like try to slow your opponents down while you just smash their face in. Similarly,
Right.
I don't like the Winota comparison personally, just
I know.
because Gut doesn't actually play many stacks or disruptive effects. It's mostly just an aggro deck.
yeah,
But it
Winota's
depends
mostly an
on
aggro deck.
Yeah.
it depends on what aspect you're focusing on the card. Like I like to call Liara Portier the Winota deck just because of the card advantage through combat and playing disruptive cards. And it's slower, but it really depends on which aspect of the card you're focusing on, and aspect of the deck,
Mhm.
color combinations, and all that stuff.
I have my
Um,
mind on Kelith and Prava, actually.
Yeah.
Oh,
Since
that's
they're
cool.
both, yeah, they're partner commanders, token strategies. And based on my assumptions about tokens, a lot of so specifically with mono white is kind of weird because it's a color that throughout the years has been really harped on as being like a bad color in commander for not having like rampant card draw, and WotC sort of struggled in designing them because of the fact that that's not particularly in white's wheelhouse. White is really an attrition type of color that focuses on keyword abilities and using virtual card advantage like tokens. And so a lot of like token generating effects are like really like at the lower scale of the rarity scale, and like the more powerful cards in white. Like if you look up like a mono white cEDH list, quite a few of them, like the white cards specifically, not the artifacts or whatever. Like Teshar runs a bunch of commons and uncommons, but like the centerpieces, like the stacks pieces, like a lot of stacks effects are just rare, because those are rule altering effects, and rule altering effects tend to be exclusively in either the rare or uncommon level. Like it's going to be like, as much as like Wizards pushes the envelope of being like, hey, we're downshifting this to a common, we've not really seen like a card that like literally changes the way that players play the game. And I'm not talking about like metaphorically, but like quite literally, like you can only play one spell a turn, or
Yeah.
all your creatures don't have summoning sick, they have haste or whatever. Like all these types of effects, like it's very like, I don't know, like, so I guess like this is for the YouTube comments or whatever. Like, put in the comment section of a card that you believe is that's a common and has like a rule altering ability, like a continuous effect. And it has to be like a positive one. It can't be like a drawback, like, oh, you skip your draw step or something like that every turn, right?
I mean,
And see if you could, yeah.
we have one. We have one right off the top of my head, which I actually played against you. I did the Stonehorn Dignitary, where you had to skip your
Yeah.
combat phase. So
Yeah.
granted,
So Stonehorn is it's a temporary one. And I'm talking about like straight up a static effect,
oh
right?
yeah, yeah,
Not a
exactly.
triggered effect. Yeah. Yeah. Like
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. Well, suppression field is coming down for us. That's what we're doing. Suppression field.
Suppression field. Oh my god.
My
Suppression
God.
field has never seen a reprint. That
Oh
card,
yeah,
I think Wizards
They
wants to
know it's too
forget.
powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, they
yeah.
want to forget that card exists. I mean, like,
I
there's
mean, it
just so
was
many cards. Like, yeah,
yeah. It's from Ravnica, right? Like that card's insane.
yeah.
Like yeah, bonkers.
Yeah, that card is absolutely, and it breaks a lot of things that Wizards cares about today. Like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, hitting fetch lands, hitting channel abilities, right? Like, you're going to get a lot of players calling judges being like, "Oh, my opponent says that I can't like channel this spell because I don't have enough mana, but I'm channeling from my hand and stuff." It's like, yeah, no, suppression field affects cards in your hand also.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's like, oh,
It's a
I'm
fun
trying
little
to
appearance
like,
with Tide Taker too.
yeah,
Yep.
it's like
Underrated card.
I'm trying to encore cards from my graveyard, but like they said that like I need to pay 2 for it. Like, what is this? And it's like, yeah, encore is an activated ability from your graveyard. Sorry, try unearthing this, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so I think going back to it, like being mono white guy or whatever, I do like I'd be very interested to see how far I can take tokens then, because you don't have traditional stacks pieces in mono white and popper, because a lot of that is relegated to the high end of the rarity spectrum. uh there and in terms of like card draw or card advantage, like I do like the idea that like white uh gets like the better end of the deal of token makers than other colors in exchange for not having card draw as like their common level spells, right? And so I'd be very interested to see where that goes. Also, the +1/+1 counter strat is very, very, very nice.
Well,
In limited, it's always been quite the blowout, I think.
well, speaking of Kelith specifically, one of the stronger decks in the format is Dargo and Kelith, and it uses the
Mhm.
protection spells to protect Dargo, and we're at 16 commander damage in this format. So you turn 2 the
Oh wow!
Dargo,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah,
you turn 3 the Kelith, and you're like, it's an 8, 2 swings. Dargo naturally has trample, so the deck is very streamlined. It doesn't care about anything else excluding the Dargo killing you. So you have to like stop that Dargo from hitting you, but it's just, I mean, it could cast Dargo like 3 turns in a row, even if you kill the Dargo. So
That's
it's
insane. There's also that that one rare common, I mean, not rare, red common that like gives a creature double strike, right?
there's a ton.
There's a few.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
There's
ton.
like 3 or 4,
There's
I
actually
think.
a ton. Okay.
No,
I
there's like
remember,
7.
3 or 4 playable ones.
yeah.
Well,
So,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
and at different like modes. Like there's Psychotic Fury, I believe, from Ravnica, but it only targeted multicolored
Multicolored.
creature.
Yep.
Yeah, but then there's one from Mirrodin Besieged, I believe, that's sorcery speed though.
Yeah, well, we
Uh,
have Assault
yeah.
Strobe, we have like a
Yeah,
Tamir
Assault
Battle
Strobe. That's what
Rage.
it.
Buccaneers
Yeah.
Yep.
Bravado.
Buccaneers Bravado targets a pirate. Dargo's a pirate, right?
He's a
Like,
pirate. Oh wow.
yeah,
+1/+1 and double strike.
yeah.
For
So
Like
2
like,
Dargo
mana,
Malcolm
instant
seems like it's
speed.
probably a deck.
yep. Dargo
Yep.
Malcolm is a deck. It does very well in the format. So there's yeah, like that's the whole different dynamic though, right? Like Dargo actually attacks you and kills you. It's not like in cEDH where you're
Right.
like, where's my Ashnod or not Ashnods? Where's my alter effect, right? Let's just chain them with Bergie indefinitely, right? So the dynamic is much different, but it's still just as exciting in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
definitely.
one thing, one of the reasons I really like TPI, and I maybe I'll revisit it at some point, is one of my favorite all-time decks is vintage Jeskai control, specifically Luris control.
Whew.
And I love the idea of somehow applying Xerox theory into a four-player format, right, where your cantrips are just worse, right, because you're not getting advantage over an opponent. You have three other players to account for, right? So this is part of the reason that TPI was so interesting to me, is because I could play a cards like Gush, right?
Oh yeah.
Draw two cards,
Mhm.
reset my Mystic Sanctuary, make a 1/1, right? Or and then play of one mind, right? And then play one blue, draw two cards, make another 1/1, turning those spells into more value than what they get on their surface, right? To try to actually get advantage, tempo advantage over my opponents. It seems like there is space for that. I don't know the format enough to actually know how to apply that, but that does seem like something that I would like to explore.
I know you can write a whole book about Gush.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's a good book. I don't know if you read it. It's not bad.
Yeah. I am sometimes reminded of myself that making a joke like that, fewer and fewer people get it because I'm getting older and less and less people know about the book on how to gush.
That's super funny
I
because
mean, how many people have had Gush played against them?
that's
Modern
true.
Magic players. You know?
Yeah, that's
Oh.
true.
What are you saying, Chris?
Well, no, I was just gonna say I was kind of laughing when you said that because like we're similar in age, and I was about to say you're showing your age there, Charles.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I mean, like I'm just thinking Rebel's just going to do a video. I mean, she did one on Philosophy of Fire, right?
Mhm.
And that's like Sly adjacent. Like when back in the day with like Patrick Sly and Jackal Pup, and I think like Ristic Studies did a video on Jackal Pup on Red Deck wins and the history of Red Deck wins. Like eventually, I'm expecting some content creator to just talk about Gush and take what was written in that book and apply it in a Zoomer format these days because people don't read anymore.
Nice video essay.
Yeah,
Yeah, nice video essay. Yeah.
I'd watch it. Big Gush fan.
yeah, that does sound pretty good. All right, Puzzle. Well, what do you got for us? Anything else for us, or are we wrapping this puppy up?
I think that covers everything for me.
Charles, Dylan, anything for us?
Oh, thank you for having so I mean like I really enjoyed the conversation. I know I talked a lot, but I really enjoy fundamentals and Magic, and I think that this format has a lot of that here. It's really nice speculating, and thank you for letting me speculate.
Definitely.
Yeah, same here. Thank you guys for having me on. I
No,
appreciate it.
by all means, no. We really appreciate you having you guys here, and I just want to say once again thank you. And Puzzle, take us home, my man.
Yeah, and I better get some games in with you guys at some point.
Yeah.
But thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a comment below. Let us know your thoughts on this. Let us know some of those power stacks, game altering effects that you think are stacks in our format that Charles was talking about earlier. Let us know down below what we need a list of those for. Like us, like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you aren't already, and we'll see y'all next time.